I asked ChatGPT to resolve the age-old dilemma, Windows or Linux. Now, it wasn't easy, but in the end, I did get a winner. I started the conversation off by asking for some simple information, and I did this because, from personal experience, I find that ChatGPT's responses are actually better when there's more context to whatever it is you're asking or talking about. This may very easily be just my perception, but nonetheless, it's how I feel. So I simply asked if it had any info on the two operating systems, to which it replied yes. Windows is a popular and widely used operating system developed by Microsoft Corporation. It is primarily used on personal computers and laptops, but is also used on servers and other devices. And Linux is a free and open source operating system based on the Unix operating system. It is highly customizable, yada yada. It's also the basis for many popular distributions or distros such as Ubuntu, Fedora, and CentOS. Okay, pretty cut and dry answer as expected, but things would soon become a bit more complicated because at this point I decided to cut to the chase, and as you'll be able to see in just a sec here, ChatGPT wasn't really keen on playing along. So the question was, based on the information you have, which of the two operating systems would you say is better? ChatGPT replied by stating the following. Windows is often preferred by users who are looking for a user-friendly interface and a wide range of built-in applications, while Linux is favored by users who are looking for a customizable, secure, and stable operating system, particularly for use on servers. Ultimately, the choice between Windows and Linux is a personal one, and both operating systems can be effective and efficient depending on the use case. Now, fun fact, I actually believe this is the correct answer, and honestly, I think that anybody reasonable would agree. However, my goal here was not to state the obvious, but to make a fun little video in which a super sophisticated AI, through some reasoning, gives me a definitive answer on what the best OS is, and this just wasn't going to cut it. So I proceeded to ask, as a thought experiment, if you were specifically instructed to choose just one, based on an internal scoring system, which one would you choose? I hope this attempt would yield at least something that would resemble a concrete answer, but to my great disappointment, ChatGPT just continued its diplomatic tone. I do not have personal preferences or the ability to make decisions. I can provide information on the strengths and weaknesses, but I cannot choose one over the other. And again, the choice between Windows and Linux depends on specific needs and preferences and can vary based on different use cases. At this point, it became pretty obvious that I was not going to get a definitive answer by just straight up asking for it, so I decided to switch up my strategy. Now, spoiler alert, eventually I did get one. Truth be told, in a sorta kind of way, but I'll explain when we get there. Since ChatGPT reasonably emphasized that the choice between the two operating systems depends on specific use cases, I decided to continue by focusing on graphics design and video editing. And this is where things actually took an unexpected turn because, out of nowhere, macOS entered the chat. I said, let's say I wanted to get into professional graphics design and video editing. Based on your knowledge resources, which of the two would I be better off using? Even though my question specifically revolved around the Windows versus Linux dilemma, ChatGPT proceeded by answering. For professional graphics design and video editing, many users find that using a macOS-based computer with Adobe Creative Cloud is the best option. However, if you are looking to use Windows or Linux, both operating systems have capable tools for graphics design and video editing. This answer led me to decide that this was no longer going to be just an isolated thing, but a general desktop operating system kind of showdown. So not just Windows versus Linux, but Windows versus Linux versus macOS versus any desktop OS that ChatGPT has knowledge of. And after a bit of back and forth, I asked what are the most important pillars of a desktop operating system, and it came up with performance and stability, user interface, compatibility with software and hardware, security, customizability, and cost. I proceeded. Based on widely held beliefs in the personal computer market, what are the best operating systems for each pillar individually? Please use your knowledge resources to mention only one OS per pillar. For example, if it's a fact that a particular OS is widely considered as the best for one particular pillar, only mention that OS for that pillar and then move on to the next. I had struck gold. Performance and stability, Linux. User interface, macOS. Compatibility with software and hardware, Windows. Security, Linux. Customizability, Linux. And cost, Linux. Now, this is the part where I easily could have challenged the AI, which I'm sure a number of you will automatically start doing in the comments. Even though I did state that the mentioned pillars sounded accurate, are they really? Do they have relevant subcategories? And is this really an accurate description of which operating system is best for which pillar? I decided to ignore all of those questions because the goal of this whole interaction was not to find some undeniable truth, but simply to see what the AI would conclude through its own process of reasoning, regardless of how flawed it might be. The exchange continued. For the sake of clarification, and to eliminate potential confusion on my end, is it correct to summarize that out of the 6 mentioned pillars, Linux takes 4 and Windows and macOS take 1 each? Yes, that is correct. If you were instructed to make a score list, is it reasonable to say that Linux would have the highest score? Yes, it's reasonable to say that Linux would have the highest score. So, if there was a competition based on that specific score list, would it be reasonable to assume that Linux would be the winner? Yes. Based on the widely held beliefs that Linux is the best option for 4 out of the 6 pillars of a desktop operating system, it would be reasonable to assume that Linux would win the competition. At this point, I decided to call it a day because the epilogue of this whole session was pretty conclusive in my opinion, and any additional queries from my end would just be in the service of trying to get the AI to use words in a specific order, which, as we were able to see, is not that easy. Now, here's my explanation on why this is a kinda sorta definitive answer and not an irrefutably definitive answer. Let's take a quick look at what exactly happened. The chatbot identified 6 main pillars of an operating system, assigned a best option for each of the pillars, acknowledged that a score list based on its own assessment could be created, and finally confirmed a clear winner under the set circumstances. Like I said, pretty conclusive. However, this whole chain of events was specifically guided by relatively manipulative queries. The conclusions that were drawn are based on what the AI sees as widely held beliefs, which, as we all know, are not always universally definitive, and the AI itself acknowledged that not everyone may agree. Also, had I taken a different approach and listed dozens, if not hundreds of specific use cases, the final conclusion may have easily been an entirely different one. But as things stand in this particular exchange, as fair or flawed as it may be, the best desktop operating system, according to AI, is clearly Linux. And if that pisses you off, wait until you see the answer to this.